Our next topic is a presentation on CVE partner membership and a discussion of requirements, hopefully some thoughtful and engaged questions and comments as well on this subject as well, but we'll be led through this by Mr. Todd Beardsley. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. So yeah, let's talk about this is a lot. This probably is the least technical talk so far. Thank you, Lisa, for all that info on how Microsoft does the things it does. I feel your pain. I know that people give you heartache all the time, but man, hardly anyone can beat you on volume. So there you go. All right. So yeah, let's talk about CVE partners, and this is going to be interactive. So you're going to be two screen in this thing. You can either use your phone or you can open up another web browser. If you have giant amounts of real estate on your screen, you should I would encourage that because we're going to build a bunch of word clouds together. And so the purpose of this is twofold. One, I really do want to know, like, from you all, the gathered CNAs, of what do you want the CVE program really to look like? We have 412, I checked this morning, CNAs out in the world. We're probably going to get another 400. What should they look like? The CVE program has emphasized volume over everything else. And so there is now some concern, right? Like, maybe not everyone should be a CNA. Maybe we don't issue a CNA API key to every human as they're born. But like, what do we want to see out of of the kinds of organizations that are good recruits for CNA, and what do we not want to see? So we'll get into all of that. So here's some vague ideas of things to think about for what organizations would make for good CNAs. And so you see on here a list here, but lists are boring. We're going to go to a cool word cloud. So you have a QR code. I promise I won't on your phone. I don't have cool camera Ode. That I'm going to tell you about. But if you hit that link and select the right number, you too can throw words onto this word cloud. For every one of these slides, I have seeded them with some early ones. If you want your opinion noted correctly, try to pick the same kind of capitalization, or whatever. I think it's cap sensitive. I don't know. I suppose we could find out. I see tons of things in the chat, and yes, there we go. So we got some people now getting in there and filling in some words. I like word cloud a lot for this kind of thing because it means we can keep talking and we can chat. And I also implore you, if you want to say something, feel free to raise your hand. I'm sure our tech friends will be able to unmute you, drop it in the chat if you like. But I would encourage some back and forth chatter. I see that PCerts are a great, big, awesome candidate for CNAs, followed by vendors and certs. And by certs, I mean like national certs. So we have a few, right? We have Cert CC here in the US. TW Cert is one. The JP Cert CC is one. Like, we have a few, right, in the world. But there's 198 countries in the world, depending on how you count, about 198. And should every one of them be a CNA? I don't know. How often do certs come up with new and novel vulnerabilities that they need to describe in the CVE? So that's one thing I think about quite a bit, right? Is like, and we'll talk. I have another slide about it later. Like the kinds of behaviors we want to see out of CNAs. But one of the concerns is, like, we do a bunch of onboarding work, right? The Roots and MITRE as a secretariat does that. And is it a big waste of time if you recruit a CNA and then they don't produce any CVEs? I would argue yes.
Hey, so Todd, we have a question in the chat that maybe is
Please.
something we're going to get to anyway, but I'll read it out loud.
Please.
Do you mean good, as in it's a good idea, or they do a good job, or are they underserved, right? Or are they maybe underrepresented is the right kind of word in the CNA program? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a great distinction. Good CNAs, as in, do you think they would be well behaving or useful or good for? Like, I think of this as good for the CVE program, right? Like, what one thing I would think of is like particular industries, right? So, like, and I see a few on here. I have a tiny screen, so it's a little hard for me to see, but let's move my wicket around a little bit. Here we go. Yep. Pacemaker makers. That's quite specific. But that's a thing, right? Like, we love to have more healthcare providers specifically who make and produce and maintain software, which is, as far as I know, all healthcare providers. So I would say that, like, think of this in terms of, what would be good for the CNA program? I think you can teach anyone to be a CNA, really. I assume some people would be resistant to learning, but if you've signaled that you want to be a CNA, you probably have some motive for that, right? I'll stick around here for another minute or two. Pete has a comment in the chat. An occasional CVE does not make a CNA. I'm with you on this, right? This is an opinion that is growing in popularity. If you rarely are producing a CVE, maybe you're not a good candidate to be a CNA, right? And so, like, that's why I think, like, maybe national certs aren't a great place to be recruiting. I don't know why we can't have cats. See, this is the thing. This is the thing about cats. They can live in a superposition, so we can have cats and not cats. Be good CNAs as well. All right. I'm not seeing many new entries here, so I think we can move on. Unless there are any questions. Nope. Okay. Any more discussion on this? Super. All right. Next question to fill in my word cloud. So, some expectations for new CNAs. I've cut and pasted the current requirements of what you need to be a CNA. I believe it is exactly this. This is 3 bullets long. But what should we expect out of CNAs, right? So here's just some ideas. Like, for example, I would expect not only do you have a public vulnerability disclosure policy, but it's not a vulnerability disclosure policy that says, hey, researchers, tell us about your vulnerabilities and we will most definitely sue you and send you cease and desist. Like, right now, that is a technically acceptable vulnerability disclosure policy. It is a terrible policy. Don't do that. So I would love to have, safe harbor provisions as at least an expectation, possibly a requirement. We can talk about that. So here they all are in word cloud form. If you're playing along on Slido, you should have automatically advanced. If you didn't, then you can just Control R it or something. So what do you think? I'm told you I'm not gonna take all the time in talking, but I will keep talking forever.
Yeah, we do have a hand up, and before we go over to that hand, I just want to mention too that while the requirements are quite simple, there is an onboarding process that the Secretariat goes through that takes a considerable time for homework and demonstrating quality and capability. So I just wanted to echo that, or maybe state that is the better phrase. And then we have Joshua with his hand up. Over to you, sir. You should be able to speak.
Hey, Josh.
Josh, we don't hear you.
Does the webinar like runner have to do a thing every time?
I think he does, and it says talking permitted, so he should be.
He's just unmuted now.
Perfect. Colonel Smith. Colonel Smith raised his hand and then ran away.
Colonel Smith's hand is up. It is showing him as muted, so maybe he does need to actually unmute himself.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, apparently. Like I can't unmute.
Access control on this.
I can't unmute until I've been unmuted, sort of thing.
Weird. Yes.
But my hand was up. Sorry, from when I'd asked about the goodness thing.
Yeah.
So you can skip.
So covered. Okay. Great. So one thing I would highlight here that hasn't the transparency and accuracy are the big winners here so far, and I think a lot of that does cover things like open to feedback, right? I help run the authorized data publisher here for CISA. We decided early on that we want to make it easy and seamless to tell us when we're wrong, and that's why we run our vuln enrichment stuff all through GitHub, mainly so people can open issues and say like, "Hey, you got this CWE wrong," or whatever, right? We want to be able to hear that and act on it, right, pretty quickly without going through like a bunch of rigmarole. And so I would love to see more CNAs do stuff like that, right? Like be able to update and be receptive to change, right? Keeping up on things like, adding references. Like there's often kind of a news cycle around CVEs that are interesting, right? Like the vendor will release a CVE. Usually they have a patch ready at that point, and then the world sees it and freak out or don't and start rolling out the patch. But then Bleeping Computer comes along and says like, "Oh, hey, look at that. Shadow Server is seeing tons of scanning for this." As the CNA, it might be nice to add that as a reference like the day after. Everyone has that capability today. The CNAs do. Your list of references is not set in stone when you hit submit. But like I would love to see more CNAs with a workflow that considers that long tail of interest in their CVE.
Hey, Todd, it's Chris. You have a question in chat that is a pretty good question.
Mm-hmm. And what might that be, Chris, since you're looking at it?
I'll read it for you.
Thank you.
Why is a low volume CNA bad? It says CNAs know their area best. Perhaps there should be levels of CNA, and the entry level has easier onboarding but requires more supervision per CVA. Thank you, Simon.
Yes, thank you, Simon. I don't think a low volume CNA is particularly bad, but if you're going to have them, you're exactly right. Like you need a more frictionless, easier way where it's not the same, right? Like we don't want to have the same amount of lift between. I'm trying to think of somebody who's not a CNA today, right? That would probably be producing goops of software. My old go-to was Amazon, but they became a CNA. Hooray, hooray. But I would say like, let's say Volkswagen, right? Like they make a bunch of mobile apps and do a bunch of stuff, right? And have a bunch of tech. Like, and they're a popular target, right? Like you see the DEF CON research, the stunt hacking every year of like, oh, look at this, I can steal Porsches. Something like that. I wouldn't expect more than like, it would be weird to have more than 6 in a year, right? For something like that. But I still want them to be a CNA. But maybe there is a dial we can adjust for training and onboarding. So not everything is lift for that. And then on the flip side, you might have some tech provider that's like a new startup and no one's actually looked at their stuff and they probably aren't going to have a bug report in the first 6 months anyway, something like that. I don't know. I'm just making up examples.
I think I agree, Todd, like some kind of like associate CNA program or, an entry level where there's not as much expected of them. And it's kind of the gateway to becoming
we might have like a big brother, big sister kind of program, right? Like, okay, well, you're an associate CNA, so you got to get like sign off from some other CNA. We used to run a mentor program that tried to do some matchmaking. for like, here, you're new and you're old. And so like, if you come up with problems, ask these people. That's all basically been supplanted now by the CNA organization of peers, which is more many to many. But yeah, like, I don't know, like, I feel like you can probably see it coming if you're going to have, you know, a steady supply of bugs, because you have a lot of software and it's complicated and it's popular, right? So somebody like Microsoft or Red Hat, you know, like you want to get something like that, like spun up pretty fast and with a lot of hands-on, right? It's like, here's how you do it. And like, here's some homework and all that. There should be still like a minimum bar, of course, because you don't want new CNAs just like barfing out garbage. You know, but I think there's something there. I think there's something there on different levels of CNAs. Thank you, Sam. And Pete brings up the point of like, if you're only doing one a year, you'll never get good at it. I think, to paraphrase, I think that's accurate, right? Like, and that's kind of the thing with everything, right? If you have a procedure that you perform once a year, you're going to be pretty terrible at it. This is why, like, all the disaster recovery people say all the time, it's like, you got to drill on your backups and recoveries. So like, when you have to do it for real, you're not fumbling around.
So Todd, one thing that would be, I think would be in the best interest of the low volume kind of CNAs is if the CVE program had a mechanism that allowed them to not have to be the most experienced folks in the world, but still be able to incorporate a CNA or a CVE, and having those kinds of capabilities and onboarding the low volume, asking the questions as to low volume versus high volume during onboarding, and sort of addressing that so that these folks know where to go and get led through the process of issuing a CVE if they feel they have had turnover that's too much, or they've forgotten what's occurred in the last 8 months education wise. I think the CVE YouTube channel is getting to the point where it's helping, where folks that do have turnover and new people coming in can go and learn what they need to do. But for the onesie twosies, it's important the program either have a capability to do that and make that easy for them, because we really do want to encourage assignments where appropriate.
Right. And the moral of the story is that we still believe that this is true, right? That CNAs are in the best position to write their own bug descriptions because they're closest to the code usually, and often are the ones that have to fix it. Often, but not always, right? It's like the bug bounty CNAs don't have to fix anything. Researcher CNAs don't often fix anything. But encourage, like, having. I really like this idea of slaying. See, I knew this would be a great talk. I'm already getting good ideas. All right, I'm moving on. Nobody's talking in the poll. That's great. So desirable behavior. Maybe this is a rephrase of the last one, but I think it's less about, the kinds of CNAs and more about like, okay, well, you're a CNA now, so what do we expect out of you? And let's go. We have advanced on. For me, my biggest bugbear that I fight against is timeliness. Especially when we have bugs that are being exploited in the wild and we have no CVE assigned. This chaps my hide, and it chaps my hide so much I email Alec and Dave all the time. I'm like, hey, can you bug these people to please actually publish their thing? That's my biggest one personally. Other opinions on what we want in desirable behavior. Don't worry. The next slide is like, what is undesirable behavior? So don't try to phrase a negative into a positive. Like, let's focus in on like the kinds of things that we love to see out of CNAs. What makes a CNA like high quality, I would say. When you see a set of bugs from a CNA, you're going to be getting good info. How do you figure that out? So we're seeing accuracy is everyone likes a more accurate CNA. I would also add in here, which I don't think it wasn't in my seed words, completeness, right? Like I can have the most accurate CVE in the world, and I could just have every description be like bad things happen when you do a thing, right? Totally accurate, also totally useless. So specificity maybe is a word, but being specific, being complete, and convincing CNAs that they are in fact on the side of the defender. Sometimes we forget. Especially if we spend any time on pen testing or red teaming or anything. You might read a CVE and think like, oh man, I wish they would tell me exactly how to exploit this bug. Because you're a pen tester, you are a defender, turns out. And I think we talked a little bit yesterday when Art was talking in the morning about how bad guys don't really rely on CVE data to make their exploits work, generally speaking. I still want to know how often it happens, though. How often does someone read a CVE, think, aha, I know exactly how to exploit this, write an exploit, and then go execute it? I think that population is pretty small. I think I only have 2 more word clouds to fill in, so don't bail on this quite yet. And
Are you going to make these available at the end?
No, I'm going to just delete them all, Kent. Yes, I will make them available. Part of the reason to go with Slido is that I get to keep these clouds until I accidentally delete them. But yes, I can go through and keep them all. And that brings up a side note. I expect committee members permitting to have CISA put together some kind of Volntalk talk that synthesizes all this stuff. So CISA can have like an informed opinion, and the whole idea is that it reflects the sentiments of the CNA community. I take that real seriously. So we can have a whole VolnCon synthesis of all of this. But this is one data point. So thank you for helping me crowdsource VolnCon talk if it gets accepted.
Sounds good to me.
Mm-hmm.
Good plug for VolnCon submissions.
Yes. They're closing soon. By soon, I mean January.
Act fast, yes.
Yes. All right, moving on. I don't see anybody typing anymore. Somebody's typing. Get your typing in. You're done. You gave up. Oh, well. Yeah. All right, moving on. So, undesirable behavior from CNAs. This is your safe space to complain and moan and make veiled threats at Microsoft. Don't make veiled threats at Microsoft. Don't make overt threats at Microsoft. But I know. Don't hurt Lisa, please.
I need to switch. Today we're switching to Red Hat. Go ahead.
All right. Yes. Yeah. Let's beat up on Red Hat for a change. So some undesirable behavior. I put a word on here of lawyerly. Lawyers are important and a critical part to defend Americans' freedoms and all that. When you involve a lawyer in your CVD, boy, you better have a good reason, because it looks bad. This is a big one. Jumping to the top of the list, NDAs. I get it. And everyone's risk tolerance is different. And I will never tell you to don't consult with a lawyer, because that is always bad advice. But take a look at your NDAs, right? I'm looking at you, bug bounty providers. It really sucks when the researcher is being bound up by your filthy, filthy money payment. And having I get that you're buying intellectual property when you're running a bug bounty program. Maybe consider having it out. It expires after some time, and then they're ready to talk. Then they're free to talk about it. I think one does that I can think of off the top of my head. By default, I want these other bug bounty providers to be better citizens and know that transparency is the name of the game. Insincere legal threats, yes. Often those can be illegal and stuff too. So don't do that. So it looks like a lot of this is about legal protections for researchers and reporting things, and people who behave badly in the face of that. How many CNAs, I wonder, like actually do operate in this kind of like in this classically like evil company kind of behavior, right? Like, does becoming a CNA like inoculate you against this? Is there stuff we can put in the training that says like it is possible to have a safe harbor provision in your vulnerability disclosure program and an NDA that provides, you know, time limited coverage, right, for the details, something like that. I don't know. When you start getting into lawyer talk, like, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't think we have any lawyers on this call even. To address something that Art has brought up in the chat from the last slide, how often do adversaries reverse patches? I'm not even talking about that. How often do adversaries reverse problems out of CVEs, out of CVE descriptions? We know that adversaries have, you know, patch reversal skills all day long. I would argue that the ones that are capable of that don't care one whit about the CVE descriptions. They're going to find it anyway. Right. These are all, this is just like giving me such anxiety because I'm thinking about all of the evil CNAs that we don't actually have much of a problem with, I don't think. And if you see a CNA like acting poorly or whatever, like you don't have a good experience, first off, remember that they're all people and, you know, there's probably a communication thing going on here. You've just called their software, you know, lame and bad because you found a bug. So try not to be a jerk about your reporting. But if someone is like being antagonistic and making it hard or dragging their feet or whatever, tell their root, you know? That's what I would say. Say, hey, I had not a great experience with these people and here's why, and here's my specific evidence. You know, I think that everyone who signs up to be a CNA really does have their heart in the right place. As far and MITRE folks who do a lot of the training who are on this call, you tell me, like, do people sign up for CNAs specifically to be jerks? I would be surprised if that were the case.
Yeah, we have a hand up. We actually have two hands up. So why don't we go in order, and then there's a couple questions. So first, geez, I hope these go in order. Josh, over to you again.
Go
ahead.
Figured I'd get that out early. I'm sure Todd expected me to chime in when he started talking about bug bounty programs. I just, on our front, we just ask that a researcher asks first, like if they want to talk about details or anything else, because if it's not patched or there's something going on in the background they don't know about, but I don't think we've ever said no. So, but we have to kind of CYA in case they start releasing stuff that's not ready for prime time.
All right. Thank you very much. So Pete, over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me this time?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of coordination you have to do, especially with everyone using open source components.
Mm-hmm. No, if you.
We lost.
A lot of people call NDAs.
Sorry, Pete. There was just a cut.
You know, and I think we need to think through that notification.
Sorry, there was just a cut in your comms. I apologize because I think there's a slight delay. So over to you and start again.
Over to Pete.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm using Wi-Fi in a Home Depot parking lot. Hurricane Helene, that's what I say. So I think most people are missing the problem set about open source and everyone using similar or using the same components and trying to get fixes. And there's a coordinated vulnerability disclosure part that most people just don't account for that I think we need to work on. And more importantly, it's the follow-on notifications, because while the upstream can get a fix potentially quickly, it's getting everyone else onto that fix and making sure it's complete that we're missing. And people have a tendency to say, well, I'm under an NDA. It's under embargo. And I think we're missing what is the broader part. And then how do we coordinate that back to the researcher, which I think we're still failing at. Over.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, and I noticed Julia had the question in the Q&A about CVD being one of these undesirable behaviors, and if there's more to say there in terms of perhaps what, I don't know, some of the processes in there, or if that's just a joke. I don't know.
No, I mean, like, call it out, right? Like, we don't have to take bad behavior, right? And if we want to have like an active program where we want to actually shape like how coordinated vulnerability disclosure works, we have a great opportunity here in this program of how CVE works. And so if you see consistently bad behavior, reach out to the root, reach out to them, reach out to the root, try to be kind, give some grace, all that. I know I am full of many varieties of anxiety right now. And so sometimes I'll be a little quick to judge, but try to take a breath before I hit that send button, right? All right. Let's move ahead bravely. So the last two are about CVE quality. I had these in here as kind of backstops in case we had like super long discussions about in one of the slides. So a little bit of scope creep on this presentation, but let's talk about what makes great CVEs. Shall we? And the next word cloud after this will be what makes terrible CVEs. So do try to stay positive. You'll have a chance to be negative at the end. You will notice that on this slide, I have CVSS and CWE, and I don't have any other acronyms that start with C.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, I think CWEs are crazy important. Of the many kind of enrichment style data points that ADPs and CNAs and all the rest can add to things, I really like CWEs a lot. I don't really get or understand a lot of the CWE hierarchy stuff, but the fact that I can like point to a CWE that means insecure or direct object reference, for example, makes my job on communicating about these bugs like a lot easier when I see that. I'm like, oh, you think it's an IDOR? Okay, it's probably an IDOR. And then I don't have to like guess around on like what kind of authentication bypasses this, right? I love CWEs. I also like CVSS in terms of vectors, right? Like the actual vectors. I don't care at all about the number. I just know like, over 7.2 is bad. Under 7.2 is probably also bad. I don't know. I have to look at the vector. So it saves me a little bit of time on the upside, but the downside doesn't really save me any time. To echo what Josh is saying in the chat, every once in a while I can actually look at the chat. Yeah, your CVE should be, we still have the language in the rules, right, about independently fixable bugs, or did that get jettisoned for being too nerdy? I think that's still in the rules. Which is to say, if you have a CVE in a common component, cool, tell me what the component is. Don't try to give me one CVE that covers 9 wildly different products. Or do, whatever. I mean, like, you're implying rather strongly that you have a shared code base there. And that's what people will believe. Now, maybe that's inaccurate. Don't do that. Don't lie about things. But I do like having specific CVEs. It's okay. We have infinite numbers available for CVE IDs. We'll never run out. Yes, Colonel Smith, that sounds like a terrible outcome in that Josh has had a case where one CVE to cover 10 pretty much entirely different products. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I really like the sentiment in here of publish early and enrich later. This dovetails with my fantasy of having a CNA that like tracks a CVE for a week, right? I think that's a great default position to be in, right? Again, I know that many people have those meddling lawyers in there that want to be perfectly accurate on first publish.
Yeah, I have a question about that, Todd, and you're the right person to answer it, I think, which is the timeline of that. So, for example, as we know with respect to enrichment, that the Vulnrichment ADP will itself take on an action of enriching at some point, right? But it I think, correct me if I'm wrong, stands by the fact that they would rather not. They would rather have the CNA do it. They're the best position to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that timeline where you say, okay, let's get the CVE ID out as quickly as possible, or get the record out as quickly as possible, and then enrich later? Can you say more?
Yeah. And, maybe it's hypocritical or paradoxical, but what I would say is that like the number one thing that most folks care about in the case, so you have several cases, right? You have vulnerabilities that are being exploited in the wild right now, and I got to have something to hang my hat on. In that case, you're on a different timeline, right? You are catching up now to attacker behavior. And so in those cases, I would rather you have a CVE ID that is authoritative, that says one or two things about the vulnerability, publish it. So that way we can start tracking it, right? We can start doing CVE things, and, the defenders can all talk about the same thing, and they can share between different components and all that jazz, right? I think in the normal case, you don't want to I don't want to make it out like you should rush things out the door. But if you have a bug and you're confident that it's not being exploited in the wild today, take the one person unit, right? Like maybe that's 1 man hour, or maybe it's like one person 15 minutes or something, to see what you can get out on that first pass. But the thing is like, I wouldn't worry too much about shipping errors, because it's so easy to fix. Ideally things get contained in the CVE.org corpus. And so you can always update there. To answer your question specifically about the Vulnrichment stuff, if you don't have it, we'll add it. And then if you add it later, we'll remove it. And by we, I mean CISA, right? CISA ADP. We look at CVEs, and for the ones that like hit the stakeholder specific SSVC threshold for interestingness, we will add we'll make some guesses on CWEs, CVSS, all that. We might be wrong. We're probably wrong. But if you come in later and do it like an hour later or something, you're probably still inside the window for us. I think we lag today by like a day or two, now that we've kind of dug ourselves out of the hole. I think that's accurate. I don't think it takes us a week, right? And I think even 3 days would be kind of long for us. But if you publish and then an hour later publish an update, we'll almost certainly be catching that.
Thanks, Todd. And I just want to call out a question that I don't even know if people will be able or willing to answer, but within the chat, has there been legal actions taken against CNAs based on their CVE content? And Kent says, not that I'm aware of. For myself, I say not that I'm aware of. There are every once in a while the sort of, hey, don't you do that, or we'll do some legally thing, but no, to my knowledge. Todd?
So I'll say, I don't know of any. I'm in that camp as well. I don't know of any. Here's what I'll say is that several years ago, I ran a poll. Colonel Smith will remember this, for everyone who has contributed exploits to Metasploit, right? These are people writing exploits. And at the time it was like 400 to 600 people or something. And we asked 2 questions. One, does threat of legal action stop you from publishing exploits ever, right? Like, has that ever stopped you? And then 2, have you seen legal action? Like, has someone sent you a cease and desist? Has someone done something has anyone in authority threatened you with criminal prosecution? And the answer surprised me in that I saw higher than I was expecting sentiment of like, ooh, if I publish this, they're going to come after me, so I'm not going to publish it. So the chilling effect. But nobody, it was zero at the time, it was 0% of respondents said like, yes, and I had to deal with cops or Department of Justice or a very, very angry lawyer. Like, the threat of it is like kind of always around, but I think it manifests pretty rarely. And I think it manifests rarely because the chilling effect works. That's not great. I will open it up to anybody else who can tell us that we're lying. But I imagine that if you have seen action, you probably have an NDA in there somewhere saying you can't talk about it. Yeah, it reminds me, Josh, of the situation we have with like GPL license, right? Like, a lot of people talk about it. A lot of people worry about like, the infectiousness of it, the virality of it. As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, there have been 0 court cases about violating GPL. Pete probably knows way more than me. And when I say court decisions, let me specify that, because there have been settlements for sure. But I don't think it's ever gotten to a judge. I think we have no case law. Bit of a tangent, but it's the kind of thing that I think crops up in our industry, especially in security, where like there is this legal component that's confusing. And as technical nerds, we understand that there's lots of things we don't know about this other technical area called the law. All right. One typing still. Oh, no. Okay. We done with this cool word cloud. All right. So this is what
we have about a 3-minute timeline here to keep on schedule. So over to you, Todd.
Perfect. I'm going to come in hot. Writing inscrutable CVEs. What would you do to write a CVE that is confusing, unhelpful? How can you write a CVE in such a way to enrage everyone on this call? And you're welcome to be silly about it. You might have swears. Here's something I want to throw out. What if your only reference was a TikTok video describing the CVE? Would that be acceptable? Because recall, the references don't have to be text. Typos are the worst. I worry some about quality of patching when I see typos in CVEs.
Usually that's a different set of people.
Yeah, well. I disagree. We should have more wingdings in our CV. We should have emojis. But wingdings are cooler because they're older. Are wingdings a Unicode standard, or is it just a Microsoft thing? I don't know. All right. I'm going to keep this slide up because people are still typing. But with that, I will thank the collected body here for helping to write a Volcom talk. And we'll give you all shout outs, right? That's the idea. We started this process of imagining what would be good CNAs in terms of like good citizens defending the internet and good for the program and good for the end user and all that. We started talking about this about a month ago, I say, in the CNA Organization of Peers, or COOP, or co-op working group. And we popped it up into here to get the broader perspective from hopefully more CNAs who don't come to the COOP, and that's fine. But you should come, it's fun. And this will culminate in probably a proper paper and slide set for Volcom out in April.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Todd.
Well, thank you so much. And I will stop sharing. Boink. I'll turn my camera so you can see.
Todd, do you want to give a quick plug for joining the COOP and how to join?
I will. So, hello, everybody. It's me, Todd. This is you can tell from the halo. This is a pirate. This is a logo. I'm sure they'd be mad. Joining the co-op is easy and fun. If you actually it's less easy, but still fun. If you sign up to the Groups.io group, I don't have the link handy, but maybe Dave has it handy. You can join the group. Groups.io is where a lot of our mailing lists live, but not all of them, weirdly. You go there, you will find the CVE program, and then sub-programs in there. The COOP working group is in there. So sign up for that. You must be a CNA representative to be in the co-op. And we have meetings every other Wednesday. We have 2 meetings. We have 1 US time zone, 1 Pacific time zone. So I encourage you to join, hang out, help. We get a lot of noobs in there because it gets flogged pretty hard in recruiting. People show up and then they don't show up after they get their feet under them, which is fine, which is a perfectly wonderful use of that working group. But it's a pretty good mix of like old and new CNAs, and we talk about CNA life. It's really fun.
All right. So yeah, I think we're going to put that link, by the way, in the chat. So we will be doing that, of course, and then you can also request to join a working group on the CVE.org website.
Or if you get a hold of me, I'm sure I can get it done for you. I'm on Slack. But yeah, here's the URL. If you go there, you'll figure it out. There's like it's kind of a 2-step sign up. MITRE, or the secretariat. I keep saying MITRE. Secretariat has to make sure that you're who you say you are somehow. Once you do that, then you can join the COOP.
That's exactly right. All right, cool. So we have now reached our break time, which is very important. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to recoup, perhaps. We will get started again at 12:15 p.m. Eastern time with a panel discussion on a number of topics, followed by our Q&A open floor discussion, going both directions. So without further ado, go ahead, stretch your legs, take a break, have some lunch, have a snack, and we will be back at 12:15 Eastern. Thank you so much.